nor the camera and other people standing behind you.
Yeah, just pretend like
Not
you're
over
the
your
only
shoulder.
ones.
We're the only ones in the room. Just like with Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
When he talks to you, it's like you're the only person in the room.
Ooh, really?
Yes, he is a charmer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Cool. What was it like to meet him?
Great. I've met him twice. One, he came to our university, and then he came to the bookstore to sign his book. And when he walked in, he said, "Oh, you have a beautiful store. Hillary said you had a beautiful store," because I had hosted her about 3 months earlier.
Wow.
And she said, "Go to the Human. It's women."
So can you tell us who you are and what you do?
My name is Clara Villarosa, and I am the president and co-founder of Villarosa Media, which is a boutique publishing house that specializes in books by and about African American authors.
Wonderful. I'd like to kind of go back a little bit to when you started the first Human experience in Denver, Colorado, and kind of about how that came to be in that whole story.
I was working at a bank and I had a boyfriend, and he wanted to open a business, and he decided to open a little card shop. Well, at the bank, I hit the glass ceiling and I got a buyout, and so we had money, and so instead of doing a card shop, decided to do a bookstore. Now I wasn't working, so now I was going to be involved in the business, and I found it to be my passion. I love being an entrepreneur. I never would have thought that that would be something that I would enjoy, because I'd always worked at a hospital, at a bank, as a social worker. So this I didn't know really anyone who owned their own business, and so this wasn't an aspiration. But once I did it, I was hooked.
So awesome. That's really cool. Can you tell us a little bit, I know when you worked at the bank and you hit the glass ceiling, can you describe that negotiation process of you leaving? And I know when I was at your house before, you told me about how you slipped this sheet of paper.
That's right.
Yeah. Can you tell us that story?
I had been at the bank a couple of years, and I was the highest African American in the bank. And the bank sort of turned against me. I wasn't really a banker. I was a social worker. And so for an outsider, you come into the bank and you wait your turn. You don't start to make waves. Well, I was managing human resources and strategic planning. And so I felt things needed to change, therefore I wanted to make changes. It didn't set very well in the banking culture. And so when I hit the glass ceiling, they slipped me a piece of paper and said what they were complaining about in terms of my behavior. And so I looked at it. I was devastated. They were asking me to leave. I went home, I cried, I got up the next morning, and I put on my power suit, and I walked in and said, "You don't want me here, and therefore I don't want to be here. So I'm leaving. I will resign. And there's a number on this piece of paper that I want you to look at." And I returned the piece of paper that they gave me. And when I get that, I'm out the door.
Yes, that's awesome. It's such an amazing way to kind of take power back in
That's
that
right.
situation.
But I was devastated. Made sense. I cried. Yes, I did. I cried big tears. And then I woke up in the morning, not angry, not upset. I took my power back. And yes, read that number. Now can we talk?
That's awesome. For the Human experience in Denver, can you describe what it was like to run that store and kind of the everyday process? And just because you hadn't been an entrepreneur yourself,
No.
and how old were you when you started it?
In my 50s.
Yeah, so can
Yes.
you describe to us a little bit about kind of what it was like to be an entrepreneur?
The first Human was a small store on a small street in Denver, Colorado. And I don't know if you're familiar with the E-Myth. I was the person doing everything. So if you had to have cookies, I had to buy the materials, I had to bake the cookies, I had to serve the cookies, I had to sell the cookies. I was doing everything. But that's what I thought was expected. I didn't realize that there was a place beyond that. And once I got there, I began to think, now I'm going to be really in charge of the business. The business is not working me, I'm working the business. And then I began to hire people, and I knew how to do that because I managed human resources. So I knew how to hire. I knew how to manage people. I knew how to establish job descriptions. That took time. But at the beginning, I was just running line like the little chicken, like the little hen. But you learn, and fortunately, I had role models that I could look to or people I could go to. And one of the persons was another woman, and she owned the Tattered Cover bookstore in Denver, Colorado, which was the largest independent bookstore in the country. And she took me on as a mentor, Joyce Meskis.
Wow, that's awesome to have somebody so close to the field, helping you along. Can you describe what that relationship was like?
Well, it was special. Now, there were men also who tried to help, but they really didn't understand my position as being an African American female trying to run a business. She did. They would try to explain things to me from their perspective, and it really wasn't coming from where I was coming from. But Joyce, she understood because she was a female. And she could tell me, yes, yeah, they're going to say those things, they're going to do those things, but that's okay, you just keep moving. And I would call her up, and I may have been a little teary or may have been a little upset, but she understood it. And I felt it was okay to sort of have your meltdown. You melt down, and then you melt up.
Ooh, I love that. That's such a good quote of coming back together and letting it out and then bringing it back in.
And men don't let it out. But women let it out, and then they think of that as weakness. No, it isn't. You let the feelings out that come at the moment, but they don't have to stay there. You can bring them back, and then you can use it and say, all right, I'm anxious. What am I anxious about? What can I do about it? Is there anything? Yes, there's always something you can do. May not be as much as you think you can do, but at least it's something to get you back on the track and get you started again.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the story you were telling earlier when you first got here about being a little girl and thinking you wanted to be a teacher and kind of not having as many role models in business to kind of look up to. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, when I was growing up, there weren't many but I grew up in a black neighborhood. And most of the people in the neighborhood did not own businesses. They were not in positions of power. And so at school, I saw 3 black teachers, and they were beautiful, and they were smart. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to grow up and be pretty and smart, and I'm going to be a school teacher. My mother thought that was great. I got into college, and I got into student teaching. There were too many people in the room, and they were small, and they were fidgety, and I couldn't remember what I was supposed to do with them. So I sort of freaked out, and they took me aside and said, Miss Alexander, we think there may be something else you can do, but teaching doesn't seem the right thing for you. I was devastated. I had failed. I really didn't know what to do next. I wanted to go to college. I was in college. And so I was working at Hull House, and I saw the social worker, and she saw one person at a time. And I said, wow, I can do that. I think I can manage that one. And so I changed my major to social work, and I went and told my mother, I want to be a social worker. And she said, a what? I said, a social worker. And she says, and work with poor people? And I says, no, I want to be a psychiatric social worker. And she said, and work with crazy people. Okay, scored out on that one. So I did, and I loved it. I loved being a therapist. And that was my first calling. That seemed to me like the perfect thing. I couldn't ask to be anything else. And then something happened, and somebody saw in me something beyond that I didn't see. I applied for a job as a social worker after being off for 7 years with my 2 children being home. And I applied for a social work position. And they called me back in the interview and said, are you interested? We have another position for you. It's the chief psychiatric social worker. Oh, I said, oh, I can't do that. I haven't done that. How am I qualified? She said, you have 4 years before you left to stay home with your children. During the 7 years you were home, you worked 1 day a week, and that 1 day made you qualified for the 5 years. Really? So I took the job as the chief psychiatric social worker at a pediatric hospital. It opened my eyes that I could do something that I couldn't see. And the next thing I said, well, you know what? I want to be the director of the Department of Behavioral Sciences. Now, where did that come from? I really do not know. The previous director was white, male, and a psychiatrist. I am a black, female social worker. So I said, all right, what do I do to get there? Well, number one, I know how to do therapy. I know how to do training because I supervise the residents and the interns in psychiatry. But I don't know administration. So I went to the director and said, would you show me how to do administration? And he said, well, it's managing and it's budgeting. And I said, fine. And I said, and if you show me how to do it, I'll do it for you. He said, really? Because I hate it. So he showed me how to do it. And then he left. And so they brought another psychiatrist in, and I trained him. And then when he left, I said, no more. I want the job. And they said, but you can't. I said, no. If I can train them, I can do it. And they gave it to me. And that began to develop within me a more sense of power. And then I could see bigger, and bigger, not just being a teacher, not just being a social worker. Maybe I could go beyond. I didn't know what that road looked like, but I knew that if I could do this here, then maybe I could do something else. And I didn't know what it was. And there wasn't much left for being a hospital administrator. I eventually became the chief, director of the Department of Behavioral Sciences, and then I was promoted to an assistant hospital administrator. But there was no place beyond that because any female who administered a hospital was a nun. So I said, well, there must be something. So I quit my job and went back to school to try to find out what was the next path. And I went into a doctoral program at the Graduate School of Social Work and then decided to do a dual degree and go to law school. I was fairly ambitious. That didn't work too well because I ran out of money, took the job at the bank, rose up through the bank, and then from the bank became the entrepreneur.
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd love to know kind of once you became an entrepreneur, I know that a lot of women were coming to you for advice. A lot of people were coming to you for advice. How do I finance it? How do I start a business? Which led you to write your book. Can you describe that experience?
When I was at the Human bookstore, yes, I was perceived as a role model for other women because there was one of the things that I realized I had to do was market. And marketing meant that you had to be out there. You had to be in the public light so that customers could see you, could see what you were doing, and come to you as a business. But it also attracted other people who saw you as a role model. And actually, it started I was doing a story hour for the children. And so I would read stories, and they started sending elementary schools in for the story hour during the day. And then at one point they sent in some middle school kids. They were not interested in my story hour. And so I was trying to figure out what to do with them. And they said, we're really interested in knowing how did you start this business, because we don't see many people that look like you being a business person. And I said, okay, let's make a game out of this. Let's say I've decided that I want to open a bookstore. What are some of the things that I need to do? Hands went up. Money. Okay, so I talked about how I raised money. Books. I talked about how I did the research to determine which books to put in the store. Employees. I talked about how I determined which employees I needed, how I needed person to do good customer service. I talked, and it came up, there were 10 things. And so I started doing a workshop on first 10 steps to starting a business. And then it wasn't the school kids were coming, then I started doing it for others. And that led to, I would do the workshops, and then someone says, do you have a book? And I said, oh no, I don't write books, I don't do books. They said, we are taking copious notes. If you had a book, it would make it a lot easier. And so I said, oh, okay. My daughter's mentor, or her agent, approached me and said, you need to write a book. And I said, oh, I know what I want to write. I want to write my memoir. And they said, who's going to buy it besides your friends and family? I said, well, I don't know about my family because they'll want free books. So I decided that wasn't going to work. So I tucked my tail between my legs and left. And then one day during the workshop, I said, oh, you asked for a book. I went to the agent. I said, I've got a book. And she says, you know what? That may work. And that's how I came up with the book. And after I wrote the book, I wrote one, I got it published, and then I wrote another one. And so I said, I'm not a one-shot author.
Can you tell us, when you were writing the book with the entrepreneurs, about the entrepreneurs, you kind of had the ideas and then you worked with Alicia to put it all together. Can you describe working with her?
Yes.
And who she is?
Alicia is my daughter. What I came up with was the concept for the book. So I wanted a book that had the 10 steps and explained the 10 steps to my audience. I wanted to give them stories because everybody loves stories. So I told my story, but I also told the stories of 2 other entrepreneurs for each chapter. So what I knew was I knew the 10 steps, and I enumerated the 10 steps and described them in detail. And then I gave each chapter two entrepreneurs that had businesses that were different from mine. And then one of the things that I often heard was they didn't know how to do a business plan. So at the end of each chapter, I asked them questions. And if they answered the questions at the end of the book, you had the beginning of a business plan. So I had these 3 components to go in the book. When I went to put it to paper, it was flat. And my daughter said, I can't understand this. When you speak to people, you're very engaging. It works. But when it gets to paper, it does not sound. We're going to sleep. So Alicia said, don't bother. Just put it down. I can fix it. And so when she went through and finished, I said, did I sound like that? She said, yes. That's how you sound with a little help. And so it's Clara Villarosa with Alicia Villarosa, my daughter. And the book is called Down to Business, First 10 Steps to Entrepreneurship for Women. Why women? Because women need to understand there's a person who looks like them, who can talk to them about business. In my workshops, it was interesting. The men would come, but they would always sit to the side, and they'd never ask questions during the session. They would come take you to the side and ask questions. And I realized men have a difficult time taking information about business from a woman.
Why do you think that is?
Their perception is that they don't see women in that role. And so that's why when I was doing the books, I really wanted to address women to let them know, yes, you can do this. And when I sign the books, I sign my name and I say, go for it.
Oh, that's awesome. We have to get you to sign a book for us. You also, can you describe kind of your relationship with Linda as well? I know that you guys wrote that piece for Essence together. And did you guys work together at all any time before that, or?
No, we didn't. There have been articles about me in Essence magazine, but not my daughter's. My daughter hadn't written an article. And when they approached her they were wanting to do a piece about lesbians for Mother's Day. And they wanted to talk to a lesbian and her mother. They wanted a celebrity. The celebrities weren't particularly interested in doing an article in Essence magazine. And so Linda said, well, I'll do it. And so they said, sure, that's fine, but you better ask your mother. And so Linda said, oh, that's not a problem. So when Linda called me, she asked me, and I said, what? In Essence magazine? And she said, yes, would you want to do it? I said, well, I'm going to have to sleep on this. And so I went to bed, woke up, and I thought, maybe it will help somebody if we did this. So Linda and I started to write the article. We decided what we were going to say. We were going to talk about it in terms of what were my aspirations for Linda, what were Linda's aspirations for herself. When did we begin to suspect that there was something going on? When did she suspect and when did I suspect? When was the confrontation where it was really put on the table for both of us? Actually, I went to her and I said, I suspected. I said, Linda, are you a lesbian? She said, yes. I said, no, wrong answer. No, let's start all over again. She says, Mother, I'm a lesbian. So I had to deal with it. And it was difficult because the first thing I thought, I'm a therapist. We can send you to therapy. We can get that fixed. No, I don't need fixing, Mother. And so it took me a while to become accustomed to it. But then I thought, I have a beautiful daughter. She's smart. She's successful. She loves a woman. Duh. And so it became a process. And so I thought by sharing that process, it might help others. After it was printed, well, Linda says, well, Mom, 2 million women will read this. I said, excuse me? Yes, they did. And they came and they wrote letters. And they said, we took the article and opened it, one woman said, and put it on the kitchen table. And that's how we started the conversation with my mother.
Wow, that's
So we started to go around and talk about the mother-daughter experience. And what I talked about is how I felt as a mother, how I felt as a parent, and she described how she felt. And one of the things that Linda said that I really wouldn't want for anybody, she said, Mother, the closet is a dark and lonely place. And that was not something I wanted my daughter to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. It was such a wonderful article, and it was so interesting to hear both of your perspectives and kind of how you came together closer through the process. And obviously, you're helping so many people kind of start that dialogue. I'd love to know more about kind of so you have come to New York and you started the second bookstore. Which is awesome. Can you describe what it was like? I'd love to bring you there and then kind of bring you to where you are now, where you're working with the two of them.
When I sold the first bookstore in Denver, I decided to move to New York to join my daughter and grandchildren, my 2 daughters and my grandchildren. And I said, this is the perfect time to do this. Up, leave, and come. And then someone started talking to me about opening a bookstore in Harlem. I said, have you lost what little mind you have? I am 70-some years old. I do not need to be doing this. And so I thought about it. And I thought in Denver, I didn't have much of an African-American population. There were 5 black people and me. In Harlem, there were thousands of them. And I always wanted to have a store that made $1 million. And I said, you know what? I think I can do that in Harlem. So I opened the store, started down the path, I got investors, and I opened the store. And one of the things I marketed the store in Denver, it was the largest African-American bookstore in the country. That was chutzpah. It really wasn't. But the Hugh Man bookstore in Harlem was the largest African-American bookstore in the country, and it did make $1 million. But after 3 years, I really retired again. And this time, I spent more time with my grandchildren and with my daughters, and it's been beautiful living in New York. And then a couple of years ago, Linda said, Mom, we need to start a publishing company. And I said, what? No, I am done. I am 80 years old. I really don't need to go down that path again. And then she came back and she asked again. And then the third time she says, I'm not asking again, but this is the third time. We need to do this. And I started to think about it. And I started to think about, at one point, I said, we all three have a brand. It would be awesome if we could combine our brand. And Linda says, but what would we combine it and do? And I said, oh, well, next. And so I said, maybe we could combine our brand and do publishing. African American authors are having a difficult time getting their books published now because of the tsunami that hit the book industry. Maybe we could start something and provide a portal for them to have a platform and a place to get their books published now. And so, okay, it was a mission. It wasn't just opening another business. It was doing something for a group of people that really were being ignored. And so I said, all right, I'm in.
That's awesome. That's so cool that it just kept bringing you back again.
It kept bringing me back. And when it gets on your plate, it's kind of hard to ignore it. So I guess I'm a serial entrepreneur. And this time it's a bit different. It's interesting doing business with your children. So with daughters, I know them as my daughters. And what I know about them, they are great together. They are great sisters. But it's interesting. Sometimes being sisters doesn't necessarily work. But I see that, and I can kind of smooth over the bumpy places. And one will come to me, Linda said such and such, and the other, Lacey said such and such. I listen, and I know how to sort of smooth things over. And I think overall, we work very well together because someone said, well, how does that work? Well, I know what I do well. I know I don't write very well. Example's a book. But I know the business component. I know the legal parts, and I can do that. And I can look at the big picture and keep the little pieces moving along so that we can get to the end. Linda is great. She knows everybody in the business. She knows she's an editor. She knows how to put the big thing together once I get the little pieces in. And Alicia is great. She has a great ear. And so she can listen, she can get the voices, she can understand how the words should go on the page, and she's a doer. Ah, yes, she does it. She moves along. She is the doer. She's the grunt person, and she cracks the whip.
That's amazing. Is there anything that surprised you about working with them, or that you didn't realize that they had that trait or that characteristic, or anything that shocked you while you were kind of building this together?
Not really. I knew it. I just didn't know how it would work. I knew all the pieces, but sometimes when you put the pieces together, it doesn't exactly match. But I couldn't exactly see how, but now I see how. And I see we really are on the right track. And I see also how it has energized all three of us.
Yeah, I'm sure. Especially when you're starting something, there's so much energy and excitement, and every little bump in success is so important.
Right, and I know the bumps. I've had bumps along the way. And I know that the bumps, we can get over them, around them, and under them, and sometimes we just have to go through them.
There's a quote in your second book about kind of going through obstacles, and everyone in life has obstacles, and how people they're disappointed or they shy away from them, and kind of what's your advice about dealing with obstacles?
Obstacles are there for you to gain strength. I say a smooth sea makes a poor sailor. And so in order for you to get the muscle, to the grit, to do something, you have to build the muscle. And the obstacles, the pressure, the push back, that builds the muscle. And so you look at the obstacles not necessarily as preventing you from doing something, but helping you to do something. I never saw it that way, but when I see it now, I say, okay, you're there for a reason. And so whatever muscle I have to build, I'm going to build it through this particular obstacle. And sometimes, as I say, over, around, under, and sometimes it's just through.
Oh, that's such good advice. I think a lot of people, especially young people, when they're trying to find their journey from A to B, they think they're going to get there immediately or it's going to happen with a flick of a switch, and they kind of have to go through the process and the journey. So
I tell entrepreneurs, the thing you're going to have to learn when you start out on a business is going to take you twice as long and twice as much money as you thought it would.
yeah, that's good advice. Also, can we talk a little bit about your the 10 steps for entrepreneurs? Can you give us a little bit of a glimpse or some of the highlights in that?
Okay, the first one, are you an entrepreneur? Not everybody is an entrepreneur. And so I talk about the list of characteristics in terms of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, a self-starter. If you're in a job and it takes just the boss to tell you what to do, you really do not need to be an entrepreneur because you're the boss. So you have to learn how to tell yourself what to do. Are you assertive? Because you're going to be pushed around, pushed back. Are you going to be able to get up and push yourself to do what needs to be doing? If you're not assertive, you're not going to make it. Can you speak up for yourself? Are you mousy? When you're in business for yourself, you have to speak up, you have to get in the face, and you have to do it. You cannot sit back and wait for somebody else to do it for you. So I say not everybody is able to be an entrepreneur. So look at the characteristics and make a decision. Is this for you? Can you start working on something? Can you deal with the obstacles? Can you push past it and keep on it? Or will the first obstacle put you back and you say, nope, can't do that? Where are you going to get the money to do it? It's not going to come raining out of the trees. Start small. Think big, but start small. Start with what you have. I was a banker. I did not go to the bank for money because I knew the bank would not give me money. If I had been my banker, I would have told me no because I would have not been able. I wouldn't have loaned me any money to start a business, and I had never run a bookstore before. Oh, no. So I did self-funded it. I self-funded for what I could do, where I could start, and then build from there. Eventually, I was able to go to the bank. After the bookstore in Denver was in business over about 7 years, I went to the bank to buy the building that the bookstore was in. But I knew I was bankable because I could demonstrate that the mortgage that I paid was exactly the amount of money that I paid for rent. So I could service the debt. And collateral was the building. Customers. As soon as I open my door, they will come. No, they will not come. I opened my door, and they did not come. I marketed. I marketed to all my friends. No, my friends did not show up. So I realized dribbling in were people I did not know. So I began to ask them, who are you? How did you happen to come to the bookstore? It was through word of mouth. So I stopped and said, okay, what can I do to get word of mouth? How can I differentiate this store? Well, this is the largest African American bookstore in the country. And so the media came and said, we have the largest independent bookstore, the tattered cover, and we now have the largest independent African American bookstore. What did they know? So they repeated it. And I said to my staff, everybody who walks through the door, you say, did you know you're in the largest African American bookstore in the country? And my daughter says, well, suppose somebody says you're not. I said, I lied. Kill me.
So good. It's so good.
So I put it out there. I wasn't afraid. I said it. And then ultimately, I made it. But you have to understand, you're not going to be a shrinking violet trying to get customers. You have to go out there, you have to be assertive, and you have to go out after them. I talked about my superheroes. My one superhero, my accountant. Yeah, they started out, they really, really helped me with the books. I knew something, but I didn't know enough. I had a good attorney. Those were my superheroes. My attorney said, we're going to do contracts. We're going to do leases. We're going to put together the business form. What was the best business form for me? I'm not going to be a sole proprietorship. I needed a business form. So we were a subchapter S because he says you're not going to make money at the front end. So a subchapter S, you can absorb the losses and take them personally. That worked. So that's a chapter in the book on the different types of business forms and how you select the one that's best for you. And then at the end, I say, develop a business plan. Put it to paper. Take it out of your head and put it to paper. And then go back and read the paper. Change what needs to be changed. Put it to paper. I love your idea. Put it down and let me read about it. Because that really solidifies it in your mind. It becomes something that's visual.
What's something, thank you for all those tips, they were amazing, by the way, and I love that story of you just saying you were, and well, that's how we're going to do it. That's amazing. Can you tell us what about yourself do you think that makes you a great entrepreneur? Like what characteristics do you have, or what do you see, within learning about other people's stories and also through your own?
Okay, one of the things I started to think about was my skill sets. Because people would say, you're really amazing, you do certain things, you do things well. And I really distilled it down. I am a real problem solver. And I go back to how did I learn to do that? It goes back to my social work days as a therapist. You come to me and you tell me, I'm depressed or I'm anxious or I have these problems. I have never seen you before. So I have to begin to ask you questions to elicit from you information to help me to understand why you have the symptoms that you have. If you're not giving me the right answers, I have to keep asking other questions. Once I gather the information, I have to process the information and analyze it to understand what it is that's going on with you. And then I have to sort of regurgitate it. I have to say it back to you so you look at me and say, oh yeah. Now, in the process, I'm establishing a relationship with you. So you begin to feel a sense of knowing that I know and you trust me. I do that in how much time? I have an hour. I do it within an hour and I convince you to come back to see me and pay me. Now that's a skill set. So when I'm looking or in situations, when I was at the bank and I really didn't know much about human resources, I started going around to all the EVPs and I started talking to them and saying to them, tell me, what do you do? And also I said, tell me a little bit about yourself. I did a social history and I got to understand who they were. And so I understand what they did and who they were. And these were the people who were making decisions about the bank. It really helped me to understand where I was and what I needed to do. So I gather information. People say, you always ask a lot of questions. I said, I do. I'm curious. I'm curious about you, what you do. And so that's a part of me that I know that's I have skills.
And what's something that you work on every day to try to get better at?
Working with people. Sometimes I can be a little short-tempered and a little impatient when people aren't doing what I think needs to be done. And sometimes when I'm looking at something, I get there quickly. So I have to not put that out. I have to back up and wait till the others get there. And so that takes another skill, sitting there, listening, saying things, asking questions, coming to a conclusion or a decision or an understanding, and then helping the group to get there rather than saying what you think. Allowing the group to get on board with you and you go together and a buy-in for whatever it is you're wanting to do. That happens in all relationships. And I just want to keep getting better and better. I know I'm pretty good at it, but there's sometimes when I get impatient and I just say, oh geez, why can't they just see that? So how to zip it up, listen, and find a way to help them get there.
We want the Oprah story on camera.
Yeah.
Are we all rolling?
Slated.
Yeah.
Oh,
A speeds.
You guys both see me?
I see you.
okay.
Alright, roll F, scene 1, take 2.
Thank you, Francesca. Yeah,
Oh,
you can tell. Go ahead.
the Oprah story. I met Maya Angelou many years ago, and she came to the bookstore and she was very impressed with the amount of books and the different variety of books that I had. And so she started to buy books for Oprah, and she would buy 2 books of each one because Oprah had 2 houses, and I would ship them to Oprah's house. And then Oprah had a birthday party for her in Winston-Salem and invited me. And so I got the invitation and I was showing it to my daughters and they were saying, oh, you're going? I said, oh, no, I don't know. I can't. They said, what? So I decided to go. Once I decided to go, what was the next thing I thought of? What am I going to wear? Yes, I found something to wear. Yes, I did find something to wear. So I got there, I arrived at the hotel, and then I was dressed, and then I called down to get a taxi, and they just said, oh no, Miss Villarosa, there's a car coming for you. And so they sent a car and a driver to take me around for that weekend because it was the birthday party and other celebration. And so when I got there, Maya introduced me to Oprah, and Oprah said, did you get the car and the driver? And I said, yes. She said, well, we didn't, we wanted you to have make all the events and didn't have to worry about transportation. And she says, and I love the books, and keep them coming. And if there are any books that you think I need to have, just send them to me, and I will send you a check. It's not a problem. And I said, okay. And we just chatted. And then when I got ready to leave, I was at the airport, and she and Stedman came up and said, did you have a great time? I said, I loved it, and I really appreciated having the car and the driver. And she said, great, bye, as they went off and got onto their private plane. And so some ladies were sitting there and watching, and they came up to me and they said, we know you're a celebrity, but we don't know your name. So would you tell us who you are? And I said, honey, I'm not a celebrity. She said, no, you were talking to Oprah. You were staying at the same hotel we were, and you had a car and driver to pick you up all the time. So I said, oh, no, honey, I'm not anybody. I just have a little bookstore, the Human Bookstore. And she says, the Human Bookstore? You're the owner of the Human Bookstore? I buy books from you. I buy them through the mail. Would you sign my book? I gave it up. I signed the book. It was so interesting. And so thereafter, I Oprah was at Maya's house for Thanksgiving dinner, and I went down for Thanksgiving. And yes, that's my Oprah story.
That's a wonderful Oprah story. It's a wonderful you story as well for the bookstore. That's amazing
Yes,
that she
yes.
was a customer and everything.
Yes, that's how I met her.
I'd love to go back to kind of when you first started the bookstore. Do you mind telling us, how old were you when you started 58? When you started Human Experience in Denver?
We got to figure that out. It was in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born in 1930. So
Yes. Yeah, that would make sense. You'd be 58. Yeah.
yes,
And you were born in 1930
30.
and opened in 82,
Yes,
so 52.
I was 52.
Oh, okay. Yes, that makes sense.
I was 52 years old. I was divorced. I was an empty nester. My children had left. Linda and Alicia did not grow up knowing me as an entrepreneur. That was something later in life. But they were accustomed to my changing and doing different things, going back to school, they just saw that's what their mother did. Now, my mother was an entrepreneur. She had a beauty shop. And she worked in the beauty shop, and then she finally had her own shop. But then, back in the day, they pressed hair, and she couldn't press hair anymore because she couldn't inhale the fumes. So she went back to school, and she was 50 years old and got a broker's license, a real estate license, and a broker's license, and started another career. So I actually saw someone do that. And so when Linda decided she was going to change career, I said something about it. She says, Mother, you know it's in my genes.
That's awesome that it was such a family tradition that you were able to kind of see that. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to kind of be I'm assuming there weren't a lot of female entrepreneurs in Colorado during that time. Can you describe that?
Female and African American.
Yeah, definitely. Can you describe what that felt like, or kind of how you made your way, or did you have a support system?
Just the one person. I really didn't. And but what I learned was people saw this as something very, very different. There were some women who lauded that, who thought that was great. But there were other women which was surprising to me, who thought that that wasn't my place, that I was going into a man's world and it wasn't a place for women. And I had experienced that once when at the Children's Hospital, when I was promoted, and I was promoted to an assistant hospital administrator, and one of the department heads was female. And she went to the director of the hospital and said, I am not reporting to her. She's incompetent. She doesn't know what she's doing. And she was the director of the Department of Social Services. And he said, well, the reason I assigned her to you is she would understand and she would be your advocate. And she says, no, I am not reporting to her. And so she resigned. And then she filed a claim for unemployment, and they turned her down. And they said that they forced her to retire by assigning me to be her manager. And she lost the case. So I had sort of experienced that before, and I got pushback from other women. And I thought maybe they were afraid to do it, and in some ways they were a bit jealous that I had done it. And so what I just tried to do was to speak to women as in a group, to share what I knew about being an entrepreneur, because there weren't many places for them to get information. And so in this way, maybe I could create a bond or relationship with other women. But it was a double-edged in some respects. Some people just, and some women still had difficulty reporting to women. And I'm in charge. I sign the check. Duh.
Do you think that there is, have you seen a shift in the culture?
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about that?
There has definitely been a shift. You see more women and you see it being accepted. And women embracing other women. And one of the things that's changed is there's a recognition that women bring something different to the table. And we do. We look at the world differently. And we see women in a very different light. And so we are, in a way, can embrace women and help and mentor them. It's not easy. I did have a male mentor and I did have a female mentor. And I can say there is definitely a difference, because the male experience is not our experience. And so it is very important for the women to embrace other women. And I'm so pleased that it has changed. I hear how women speak about being mentors, about reaching out and embracing other women. And it makes me feel warm inside to see that happen. And it's a growing and understanding of who you are and what you bring to the world and to the table in a man's world.
Yeah, and I think it was so brave of you to kind of, you had your mom who was an entrepreneur, but then you kind of took that risk and that leap, and you just kind of embraced it. And even when you were promoted through the ranks of the hospital, you weren't really sure what to do, but you embraced it. Can you talk a little bit about taking risks?
Oh, taking the first risk was at the hospital, and I wasn't very sure of myself, and I felt that I really wasn't accepted. And at one point, I thought, why am I here? Am I smart enough to be here? Because I grew up in a world where African Americans were not considered to be the smartest. And they were not treated equally. And so I assumed that all white people were smart and black people were not as smart. And it wasn't until I got into college and it was an interracial situation that I could see myself as smart as. When I started to college, I was the smartest or the president of my class. However, I was at an underachieving school. So I went to school where at Roosevelt University, what was dedicated to African American and Jewish students, because there was a quota system. But the African American students did not go to the white school. The Jewish students went to the white school. And I was in a school where it was predominantly Jewish. They seemed smarter than anybody else. And so I felt I had to take remedial classes, but I eventually caught up, and I could see that I could think just like they could. But it wasn't until I was with them that it was proven to me first, because I wasn't proving anything to them. They already assumed that I was, because I was there, but I didn't feel it. So when I got the job, I was very nervous. First thing I had to do was, okay, make sure you dress right, you present right, you don't talk too much at the beginning, because people can think you're a fool, but speak out and remove the doubt. No, so I was quiet. But then I learned that I may not say something, I may think it and not say it, but then somebody else says it, and I said, I thought that. So gradually, I was able to begin to speak up and speak my mind. And I earned the respect of the other assistant hospital administrators because they had a bet. How long do you think she'll last? And they said 18 months, a year, maybe. Well, when I heard that, I was determined that I was going to do it. And then I found it was real interesting. They would come and ask me. They said, what do you think about so-and-so? You know, I'm having a problem with such and such. You know, what are your thoughts about that? But when I stepped into it, I certainly didn't feel that way. I felt I was a fish out of water. And I was nervous, and I'd sit quietly. And then I relaxed and said, oh, yeah. I may not be the smartest one in the room, but I am one of the smartest.
Can you tell us what advice you would give to someone who wants to start their own business or who wants to take a risk or wants to be an entrepreneur who maybe still has that fear inside, and kind of what advice would you give to them?
Do your research. One thing that can help you is to have information. And so if you decide that you want to be, for instance, for me, I decided I wanted to open a bookstore. Well, where do I start? Well, one of the things, I didn't know anything about bookstore only as a customer. So I volunteered in a bookstore so I could begin to learn a little bit about the business. So, and information is so available to people now. You can Google it. Wikipedia. You can find out things. So do some information. Do your homework. Figure out talk to people about it. I went and spoke to Joyce and said, you know, what is this thing? I didn't know anything about it. So ask questions, get information, and then start putting your ideas and thoughts to paper. I had a diary and I started to write it down. And it was amazing when I went back and read what I had written. Oh, that's interesting. And I could see my progress as I began to learn and to feel more confident. And also, I say take an inventory of yourself. Look at what you have done. Now, I wasn't an entrepreneur. I was new to that. But I had skill sets because I had worked at other places. What had I learned? What could I do well that was transferable? Think about what I said with regard to being a psychiatric social worker. Those are transferable skills. So look at whatever you've done in its broadest context. I was a problem solver. Yes, I was a therapist, but I was a problem solver. So look and take an inventory of yourself and ask other people, what do you think about me? What do you think about my starting a business? Some people will say, well, you know what? That may be a good idea. And some people say, oh, I don't know why you're trying to do that. It's really hard. I know so-and-so and they started a business and it failed.
Do you ever have anyone doubt you along the way about starting a business? And how you responded to
My brother. I went to my brother and I said, you know, I'm raising some money. And my brother said, what? I said, I want to start a business. He said, what kind of business? I said, a bookstore. He said, you know anything about that? I said, I'm learning. I'm doing some research. And he said, and I talked to him. He was a CPA. And I said, I'm learning about the books. He says, you don't know anything I don't know if you can even learn about that. Now, I said, Well, I started it. 5 years in, when I was looking for investors to buy the building, my brother put money into it. But, there are going to be people who aren't going to believe in you. And there will be people who will. So it weighs itself out. So it goes with the territory.
Do you think it's more important for you to believe in yourself than to have other people weigh in on your situation?
It is important, and you can start and you can feel scared, and that's okay. Every time you start something, it's okay to feel scared. Feeling scared tells you, and it is scary. It is not easy, and it is scary. So it's all right to feel scared, but it doesn't mean you don't do it. Now, if that stops you, then you shouldn't have done it in the first place. But if you can get past it, then keep going.
Yes, that's such good advice. What motivates you and inspires you to keep being an entrepreneur, and what do you think it is about yourself that gives you that drive to keep starting business after business?
I was always in some ways I was feisty. And in some ways I held back because I really didn't think that I was as good as other people. And I had that insecure side of me. And I know where it comes from. I had a mother that sort of believed, but didn't sort of believe. She pushed because she said, I'm going to teach my girls how to be independent because I don't want them to have to feel that they have to get married in order to take care of themselves. So that was there, but there was still that little piece that says, a little ugly, kind of not very attractive black girl. I had nappy hair. I didn't have pretty straight blonde hair, and it was long, and it didn't grow to be down to my shoulders. Oh, I wished I had hair down to my shoulders. So, and I really didn't see myself that smart. So I felt that in order for me to get ahead, I'm going to have to work harder than most people because I don't have as many advantages. So my brother was handsome and he was smart. He didn't try very hard, but I tried harder. And so I was a good little girl in school, I didn't cause any trouble. I did my homework. I studied hard because that's how I would be able to get ahead because I didn't have some of the other things that other people had. So I always felt I had to try harder. Now, when you're black, you're going to have to try harder to get half as far. So I somehow inherently sort of figured that out. So although there were obstacles, I started out like that. So I kind of don't know any other way in some respects. That's the way I started. But it still doesn't mean there are times when you don't doubt yourself. And there are times when there are places you shouldn't go and things you don't need to be doing. And so you always make that assessment. Is this something I really want to do? Is this something I really want to put the energy and effort into? And what I try to tell women in the book, that it's really going to take a lot. And so be prepared to work twice as hard and to get half as far, but to keep working twice as hard.
If you could give yourself advice, like your 22-year-old self advice, what would that be?
I give advice to my grandchildren, and it's a 14-year-old boy. He is 6'1", handsome, a ne'er-do-well, couldn't care less, and my 18-year-old granddaughter, who is quick, smart, feisty, a head full of hair, stands all. And I tell him, I listen to him, and I said, I wish when I was your age that I knew what I know now. To do and not doubt myself, and to do more, and to push, and to go places, and to do things. I didn't feel that confident. I look at you, I look at them and see, you have so much ahead of you. I want you to see, to look, to read, to understand, to dig deep, to research. I wished I had done that earlier. I started later, and I thought to myself, I really would have been hell on wheels if I'd started at 22. But at 22, I didn't have the confidence that I had now. And so I try to say to my grandchildren, this is what you do, and this is what you do well. Keep doing it. And I always identify what you do well. And when you slack off, I say, yes, you're slacking off. No, you can do better. And he said, oh, Grandma, no, no, I don't take that. You can do it. And so you have to have somebody, and they love my stories. And they see that in a subtle sort of way as an example.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have one more question for you. Do you consider yourself a dreamer? Do you dream big and visualize your success, or kind of how does that manifest for you?
I don't dream big enough. I dream big, but I don't dream big enough. And I still don't dream big enough. But it's bigger than what's in front of me. But, and when I get there, then I'll move. And so it's sort of a process. So they're incremental steps. But I never would have dreamed that I would be the person that I am. At different places along the way, I never would have dreamed that I could have been the director of the Department of Behavioral Sciences. I never would have dreamed that I could have been a vice president of human resources and strategic planning at a bank. I never would have dreamed that I would have actually had the largest African American bookstore in the country that made $1 million. But I did it. So it tells me that I can dream bigger. I still have some trepidation. But no, I didn't dream it. But I did it.
Oh, so good. You're so amazing. This has been so wonderful. Does anyone have any final thoughts or questions, or any of you ladies have any last things that you want to ask or are curious about through the interview?
In your life, you've been raised through many different, and you've been able to witness many different forms of feminism.
Mm-hmm.
Do you identify as a feminist, and what was it like to see those changes for women?
Okay. I didn't identify as a feminist because I saw the feminist movement as not relating to me. Because as an African American woman, nobody took care of me. When we were slaves, they treated it was equal opportunity. The women had to get out and work on the field just like the men. And so it was egalitarian. And so I wanted to be pampered and treated that way and stay at home. But I had to work. Yes, I understood how white women thought about it, but it really wasn't part of my experience. I began changing over time because I realized that African American men were chauvinist. But so I had to come to grips with that. But when it first came out, no, I was not a feminist. No. I've been there and I've done that. I'd like to go back to where you are and be taken care of. No, this didn't fit for me. But I began to see a different way of looking at it. Yeah, they were. You think about the civil rights movement, who were there? It was the men. No, you come, you bring the coffee, don't talk, you take care of us. So African American men could be chauvinists too, although they were discriminated against, and they were so the white male and the white female, yes, but no. So it took me a minute, or maybe 5 minutes, to figure that out. And so I consider myself a feminist because I think about the woman's point of view. And when I see it and see what it is, mine is a bit of a double whammy because I'm not just a woman. I'm an African American woman. So I got to push it up a little bit more. And that's okay. Because without that push, I probably wouldn't have the grit that I have now. So I am proud and pleased to be who I am. And it was a time when I really didn't want to be who I was. But I certainly am now. And I appreciate all those experiences because I like me and I like who I am now.
And we love you. So thank you so much for being here. Ladies, any final thoughts or questions?
So after you decided you couldn't be or didn't want to be or couldn't be a teacher, did you have any other role models that you looked at?
No, I didn't. And so the only person that I saw was the social worker at the Hull House. And she was a little old white lady. But the only thing that attracted me to what she was doing was she just saw one person at a time. But I really didn't want to be like her. And because she was the typical social worker. She was a single woman, you know, an old maid, and that wasn't what I wanted to look like. But I wanted to do what she did. But there wasn't any role model for me because there weren't, and the only black social workers were welfare workers. And that's what my mother said. They work with poor people. That's the only one because we were on welfare for a while. And the social worker was black, yeah. But it was a social worker. And she was working with poor people. She didn't have any position of authority.
Did you know any other entrepreneurs who were women when you were younger? Like maybe in the 60s or 70s? Is that even a...
Not my mother, but I didn't consider my mother an entrepreneur. She had a beauty shop. I didn't think about that as a business. And she was a beautician, and then she had a beauty shop. So I didn't see it as a business in the way that I see it now. But she ran a business. She hired the cosmetologists, the people who did the hair, and she ran the beauty shop. But I did not see that. That wasn't a real business, you know. And so as growing up, I didn't see that as an option at all. I didn't see it as an option because remember, that wasn't what I was going into. My boyfriend was doing that. I wanted to work. I wanted to have a good job.
Anyone else? Any final?
Yeah, I'm curious about age. You know, like as you get older, do you have to put up with less bullshit because people aren't trying to make you small? Or is there somehow, do people doubt you more? How does it work?
Age works. Age works. It's age, and it's two things. One thing that I'm very much aware of is when I'm in a room and I'm the only one. So the first thing that people are going to look at is how I look. So presentation becomes important. The next thing they're going to say, you know, how does she look? How's she dressed? How's she presenting myself? So walking up with a sense of confidence. Living in New York really helps. You can't hesitate in New York. You have to act like you know where you're going, even if you don't. So that helps. And then, my mother, she understood that because she was a beautician. She'd fix your hair, wear makeup, dress well. She said, I only have one good outfit. I wear it all the time, but I'm well put together when I put it on. So the presentation is always important because the first thing they're going to see I'm black. And then all kinds of things run through their mind about that. And it probably isn't positive. So to counter that, my presentation can help overcome that. And then the next thing is what comes out of your mouth. And so my mother said, speak well. Prunes and prisons. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Because we're from the South, and Southerners speak slow, leave the endings off of their words. This is not how you will speak. So now I'm very much aware how I wear my hair. It's short, how I present myself, because people treat me how I appear. So, and I know that most of the time when I'm walking through the room, who's in the room? A bunch of older white men in suits. So, when I walk in the room, I'm going to look as well, if not better, than those older white men in suits. I can't hide my age. I do not dye my hair. I have my little wrinkles. So they know that I am mature. When I get on the bus, the people get up. So they know how old I am, okay? However, how I carry myself and how I present myself has to make them think I think well of myself and I'm good. And I will look them in the face and yes, I may not be the smartest one, but I am one of you.
Yes, you are, lady.
And part, and I say, part of that is dress, and I understand that. And especially when I'm in the room with these old white men with suits. Don't say, but these white men with suits, they're mostly older. And so the age does help because my grandson says, I know why you're so smart. You have wisdom, Grandma, because you've lived a long time. He's right. And you had a whole bunch of experiences, and you've got a lot of wisdom, Grandma. And so, and what comes out of my mouth, all of that works for me. So age works.
Any other final thoughts or?
When you were talking about your granddaughter,
Yes.
what would you say is your dream for her in this lifetime? What do you hope that will exist for her that may not have existed for you?
My granddaughter won't have as many obstacles. When I decided I wanted to go back to school, and I was going to, I wanted to get a master's in social work, so I applied to two schools, and one was the University of Chicago, the SSA, and they took 2 blacks and 2 Jews each year. And they said it to me. Callie will not have to experience that. I went to Loyola. It was a Jesuit school, and they welcomed me in, and that was fine. And I said, I need a scholarship after the 2nd year. And they said, oh, that's not a problem. When I told them at the University of Chicago, they said, well, you have to drop out if you run out of money. But they didn't care whether I came. Number one, they told me to wait a year, and I would be on the list for the following year for the 2 slots for the black. So she won't have to experience that. She will also be able to get a very good education early on. She will also not have to temper what she wants to do based on what she sees and what she thinks exists. I wanted to be a lawyer at one point, but I didn't think, 1, I was smart enough, and 2, I could have the chutzpah to get into law school and finish. She don't have to temper her dreams. she's interested in international studies. She doesn't know specifically what she wants to do, but that's her interest. She will be bilingual. I'm not. She started out, both of my girls are bilingual, and my granddaughter's bilingual. She did an internship at the UN with the Peruvian embassy. She will have more doors opened for her. She won't have to push as many doors open, and she won't have to experience as many closed doors. So her world, last year, her father took her on a cruise up in Europe. Her mother took her to Australia because she was speaking. And then she will be going to Peru to visit her father. When I was 18 years old, I went on a train to Mississippi. So look at the difference between the two generations. And the thing that I want to do is to prepare her so that she can take advantage of all of those opportunities and feel as though she can do it. Yeah, and I hear sometimes, oh, Grandma, I don't know if I can do that. Grandma. And I said, sure you can, babes. Your grandma did it. You can do it too. Sure you can, babe. Mm-hmm. And I talked to her. She called me yesterday. And she says, Grandma, how are you? You know you're my best friend. And I'm coming home I'll be home, and we're going to go to dinner. We're going to go to lunch. We're going to have a date, just like you do with Alicia. We're going to have a date, Grandma. And so we talked about her boyfriend, and she says, he's at another school, but it's only about 30 minutes away. And I said, well, how does that feel? She said, oh, it's working okay. I said, you know what? It's probably very good that he's at a different school because you don't really need him underfoot all the time. And she said, yeah, you're right, Grandma. So I still have influence.
Of course.
I have one more.
You have one more? Okay.
If anyone else wants to ask first. Owning a bookstore through the 80s, 90s, thousands, especially specifically for Black authors, and now going into publishing for Black authors specifically, what changes did you see or did you feel your business made in the literary world for African American people?
Okay. Yes, it did make a difference because African Americans could see that, number one, we could own a business that was just like a non-African American business because it could work, it could do business, it could be well regarded as a business. Also, we provided an opportunity for our customers to see their authors because practically every day we did book signings so that African American customers could come in and see and talk to African American authors. They had a bookstore that welcomed them. And when they walked through the store, all through the bookstore and on all the shelves were books by and about African Americans. If you go into a white bookstore, you'll see a little section. You may think that's all that's out there. But if you came to a human bookstore, you would see there's much more than what you regularly see in a bookstore. So you get exposed to the authors, you get exposed to the books, you see the variety and the amount of literature, plus you go into a store that welcomes you. I said, we nurture our customers. We make them feel welcome. This is your store for you. Pick up the phone. Thank you for calling the Human Bookstore. May I help you? We hired men in the store. Why did I hire men? Most of the customers were women. They probably never saw men nurturing women in a business, catering to their needs. Men saw men in the store, they said, hey, it's cool to be in a bookstore. So it worked both ways.
What was your favorite part? What was your favorite room or like section in your bookstore?
Ancient African American history. And it told me about what African Americans did long before slavery. And it provided an opportunity and to see their accomplishments. And you don't see that if you go to a general bookstore. And so that section, I specifically went to look for those authors and put those books and put them in a section so you could see the numbers of it. And it wasn't just one or two books. And it was interesting because the men came in the store and that's what they were looking for. And I had for them. The women, my second section, was the fiction. I love the stories. I love those stories. The women, they told their stories. They told it with different voices. And it was the largest section in the store. And it let African Americans see that we were prolific. We wrote books. Not only did we write books, we bought books. Because that was what people said. Oh, why are you opening books for black people? Number one, they don't read. And number two, they don't buy books. Well, my store proved that they read and they bought books.
All right, roll F, scene 1, take 3.
The store in Harlem. I'd worked diligently. The books came in and they were on the floor in front of the space where they were supposed to be placed. And I had them organized. But I didn't have time to get all those books on the shelves. And the store was going to be open the next day. I did not know what I was going to do. My pastor came by the store and he came in, I was in coveralls, and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "Not well." He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "I'm not going to be able to get this store open tomorrow." And I said, Maya Angelou's going to be here, Stevie Wonder's going to be here, Wesley Snipes. I don't know what I'm going to do. He said, "Well, what do you need?" I said, "I need a miracle." He said, "Well, let's go pray for one." So we went and we prayed. We held hands and we prayed. And then I walked. He went in the car and we prayed. And then I went back in the store and I said, "There's no way I can get these books on the shelf the way I want them, perfectly organized. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get somebody and we're just going to put them in front, just on the shelves." So I called the Upper Manhattan Empowerment Zone. I said, "I need some manpower. I've got people, but I don't have enough." He said, "I'll send my staff over." They came and put those books on the shelf. It looked beautiful. Nobody knew. It looked lovely. And then he came, and my pastor, he had to pray. He prayed to open the store, and he said, "And you got your miracle." And Maya Angelou walked in, and she said, "Oh, it's gorgeous." Yeah. Mm-hmm. You just don't know. I get up every morning and I pray and I meditate and I read something inspiring. Mm-hmm. And I've kept a diary, a journal. Yes.
Well, you basically answered. I was just going to ask which noteworthy authors and individuals came through the store, and if you had in like one or two stories about those experiences and how that affected you.
Maya Angelou was the one that I think of the most because she was I met her before she was opening the store. She was appearing at a theater, and I was getting ready to open the bookstore, but I hadn't opened it yet. And I had contacted the theater, and because I was a theater person. So they called me and said, "We have a person who's appearing in our theater." And this person was in Denver, and this was in a suburb of Denver. And they said, this person would like to go to Denver to see the city. Would you be able to take the person around? And they said, because we know you have a car. And I said, sure, who is it? And they said, it's Maya Angelou. And I said, what? Why are you going to, I have a Volkswagen. They said, well, it doesn't make any difference. Can you do it? She will be free in the afternoon. So I said, okay. And so I took her around, and I took her to a restaurant. She wanted lunch, so I took her to a Thai restaurant, and they served fish, and she's allergic to fish. And I said, well, maybe we'll leave. She says, no, we'll find something. So they made her a ham sandwich. And afterwards she says, you know, the next time I come, if you have the bookstore open, I'll call you, contact you, and you can come. I can come to the bookstore. And I said, sure. And she did. And the rest is history. And we became friends. I went to visit her at her home. And I knew she was failing, and she died, you know, this spring. The other one was,
Can I interrupt you
sure.
for 1 second? So I know right now you guys just did the Kickstarter for Audre Lorde. I think
Yes.
that would be a great way to kind of transition into kind of, you know, having these relationships and building this company kind of through them and through the new Villarosa Media.
right, Audre Lorde was someone that I knew about, and a feminist, and a poet, and a writer, but not as much contact as my daughters. And so I became involved in it through them. And so it's a huge project. I started out thinking, well, you know, we'll get a book and whatever. But this is a big deal. She has a legacy that we are going to be writing about. And she's long gone, but she still lives on. The other day, we went to my son's school, and it was curriculum night. So we were sitting in the room, and we looked over, and there on the wall was a picture of Audre Lorde, my grandson. He's 14. He's learning about Audre Lorde and her writings, and they had a quotation from her and a picture. What can I say? She lives on, and we will have an opportunity to perpetuate that life.
And I interrupted you on your other story. Did you want to tell that, or?
What was the other story? Oh, James Baldwin. James Baldwin came to speak in Denver, and someone called me, and he was coming to speak. I asked for an author, Rosa Gee, and they said, sure. I said, she's coming to speak at your meeting, and I would like for her to come and do a book signing, if that would be okay. And they said, fine. We will send her, not a problem. And then they called me back, and they said, we have another author we'd like to send to do a book signing. Would you be open to do a book signing with this other person? I said, not a problem. Who is it? They said, James Baldwin. And I said, James Baldwin would come to the store? I've been open about a year. And I said, sure, we would host him, not a problem. And he came, and he lived in France at the time. And he came, he said, what a lovely store. And he was so impressed. And he said, I'm just delighted. And if I ever come back, I'll come to you again. I remember Colin Powell. He was coming to Denver, and they were sending him for a book signing. And he was going to the Tattered Cover. And I called up and I said, I'd like for Colin Powell to come to the largest African-American bookstore in the country. And they said, how many books can you sell? And I said, about 500. They said, how about 2,000? I said, 2,000? No, I can't do 2,000. So I hung up. And so about 2 hours later, I got a call back. And they said, Ms. Villarosa, can you really do 500? I said, yeah, I can do 500. He says, he'll come to the store. I said, really? And they said, yes, he will come. This is when he'll come. We'll get clearance and everything. And so I said, all right. And I said, well, what happened? He said, when I got off the phone, one of the guys said, who was that? And I told him who it was, and I told him what I told you. He said, you better call her back before she calls the president of the company, because she's going to call him, and you know. And remember the last time she called him, he came to the sales meeting and said, whatever that woman wants, give it to her. I don't ever want to hear her talk to me the way she did. She said we were prejudiced, we were racist, and we didn't provide the black authors to the black stores, so just give it to her. And he said, you better hope she hasn't called the president of the company before you call her back. I said, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. But I did do it. I called once before, and I asked to speak to the president of the company, and they put me through, and I told him. So it takes a little chutzpah sometimes. And the biggest signing I ever did was in Harlem, and that was Bill Clinton. And when I called to ask if he would come to our store, because his office was 2 blocks from the bookstore. And they said, what? And I said, he's not, I know he's going to Barnes & Noble, and why can't he come to the African American store when his office is in Harlem? So they said, let me get back to you. And they got back to me and said, we will sign him up, and he's going to be in New York for the day, and he will come. He will do Barnes & Noble, and he will come to UMan. And I said, great. And I sold 2,119 books. He signed every single one. He was gracious, and I was scared to death. We got coverage from CNN. All the media covered us because it was the African American store. Did I dress well? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And they said, they told me what time. He didn't come in a limo. He came up in a SVU. And they said, we want you to meet him at the curb. And I had with me my 2 grandchildren. And so they came to the store, and they said, because they think their grandmother's famous. And so he came. He was, as I said, he was just gracious. And he walked through the store, and he said, this is a beautiful store, because most people don't assume the store is going to be as large as it is, and all African American books, because the assumption there's not that many books out there. And he looked, he said, can I shop? And I said, of course. He said, after you sign the books, you can shop. And he said, Hillary said you had a beautiful store and you were very gracious. And I said, thank you, because I had done a book signing with her, and it went very well. And it went off without a hitch. We blocked the street off next to the bookstore, and we had African drummers outside. And what we did, we sold a ticket. We actually gave people tickets with a place in line when you bought the book. So you paid for the book, and you got a ticket, and that was your place in line. So we lined up the first 50, then the next 50. And while they were waiting outside, we entertained them with drummers and with African dancers. And it went quite orderly. And it went, as I said, out without a hitch. And we had security, and I had clearance, and I was to stand next to Mr. Clinton. And at one point he said, I have to go. I said, oh, okay. to use the men's room. And I said, okay. So we stopped the line, and he got up to leave, and he started talking to a woman about her hat. And I said, Mr. Clinton, I thought, he said, oh, yes, okay, yes, okay. I said, get moving. And he went, and he came back, and he signed. And I had security clearance to stand next to him to make sure that everything went well. And then I had staff to pass the book in front of him and it just, without a hitch. I said, yes, the black lady can do it.
What was it like to have to close the bookstore and like that as a business experience? And then how did you know that, like, did you have the courage? Where did the courage come from to start another company?
I recognized what happened with the industry. You can't ever predict what's going to happen. And so I always knew that things change. So I had a plan A and a plan B. But I didn't have a plan C. And by the time the bookstore closed, actually, I had retired from the day-to-day operation. But when it actually closed after 10 years, I walked through the store and I looked at the space and I remembered selecting the books. I remembered the bookshelves, and I really wanted a specific bookshelf of wood that was warm. And I touched the bookshelf, and I remember going and buying every one of those bookshelves. And I remembered the colors. They were Afrocentric colors out of a particular fabric. And I thought about the memories, and I said goodbye to it. Because I understand that's what happens. Things happen to industries, and they're disruptions. Sometimes you can manage the disruption and get beyond it, and sometimes you can't, and you have to learn to let go. It was the time. Perhaps we could have reconfigured it. It would have to have been half as the size. It was unsustainable with that disruption to have a bookstore that size, to be a specialty bookstore in Harlem. So I said goodbye to it, but it was my greatest accomplishment. And I still had that. Nobody can take that away. And to start again, why not? You got two daughters that want to do it, that are energized, that you bring something to the table. Why not? You have a mission. It's doable. You just had a successful Kickstarter campaign. You've raised money. Okay, that was a bump. You got past that bump. Okay, keep going. Why not?
You were talking earlier about you can start a business, but then once you find meaning behind your business, it can uplift you to another level.
Yes. Your business, doing a business, of course, you have to start a business knowing that the business has to be sustainable. So the business has to be a business and it has to make money, or it's not a business and you won't be able to do whatever it is you want it to do. But behind that, for me, there was a mission. And we talked a little bit just a minute ago about the mission, to show that African Americans read and they bought books, to show African Americans that there was a vast amount of literature about them, so that they had a place to come. So my mission was to show them and others who we were, and to be able to now to have the African American authors that are not getting published, to have a place where they can come and get published and get their works out. It dried up. We're going to show it's not quite dried up. No, there's a wet spot. And we're going to try to to demonstrate that. I don't know how successful we're going to be, but we're going to start down the road to see what we do, because that's the way it goes with me. I start down the road, the bookstore in Harlem. I don't know if I'm going to make this store. Oh, this is daunting. 4,000 square feet, 4,500 square feet. How am I going to get this done? I got it done. So I am starting down the path. And I really want them to see there's a portal, there's a platform, and we're going to do it. And because I know you can dance.
What a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for being here. I feel like we have like a living legend with us. It's so amazing to have you. Erin, yes.
Did I answer all your questions?